Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning to you, wherever you are tuning in from in the world. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning in for what is the third and final, but hopefully not the very last, episode in our Diabetes and Men's Health webinar series. We've had an amazing few weeks so far of very, very open and very, very insightful, informative, and inspiring discussions, connecting with loads of people with great stories to tell from around the world. And we're wrapping things up tonight with our final episode, which is all about diabetes and mental health. When we first started talking about this concept, Earl and I decided that men's health and diabetes was a topic that was really very under-discussed and misunderstood, if you will, and we wanted to bring more light and shed more awareness on a topic which we feel needs a lot more attention. And of course, though, a good man is nothing without a great woman in his life, well, for the most part. So we are delighted this week to welcome on a couple of female guests to share their unique perspectives and experiences with this topic as well, because both of them have a very interesting and unique experience and story to tell in that regard. And so we're looking forward to a very open and very well balanced discussion around the topic of men's health and the male ego, with of course the feminine insight as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the biggest panel we've had so far, which is very exciting, from all over the world. Let me bring them all on right now. We've got Greg from New York, Ron from Phoenix, Earl from Cape Town back again, Sabella from San Diego, Dallas also Dallas is in Arizona right now as well.
I'm in San Diego.
Yeah, in San Diego, sorry. And Leanne, of course. So I'll let the guys go around and give themselves a proper introduction. Please, Greg, kick us off. Welcome back, by the way.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, so like you said, Greg calling from New York, diagnosed 20 years ago. So it's been a minute, you know? It's been a minute.
Wow. Ron?
Ron Green from Scottsdale, Arizona. I've been diagnosed going on 12 years next month. I was diagnosed at the age of 30 or 31.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Carol on the top. Earl? Back again.
Hi guys, so Earl diagnosed 9 years ago, and I think, Jacob wanted us to also sort of touch on, the emotion of what we were feeling at the time of diagnosis. And I have one of those crazy stories, and you could probably read about it on my Instagram, but I was diagnosed in the United States while traveling from South Africa. And upon landing, I was in full DKA. So I guess the emotion was just confusion when I was diagnosed 9 years ago. But yeah, we'll touch on that later on in the webinar. Rian.
Well, I'm from the east coast of South Africa, Pietermaritzburg, for the people globally that don't know us, where the Comrades Marathon runs from. I was diagnosed at the age of 27 as a type 2, but I've been on insulin since 2007. My emotional side is also, like Jacob talked in our briefing and stuff, I'm, like they talk of the term, the adversary. I can't tell you which month, day, or I was diagnosed and stuff. For me, the emotional side was just, I'm a male, my ego said, just drink your tablet and you'll carry on with your life.
Never quite that simple, is it? Which again is an important thing we'll come back to for sure. Dallas, please tell us.
Hi everyone, my name's Dallas Wilson. I was born in Los Angeles, but I live in San Diego now. I spent 6 years abroad before the pandemic for my master's degree in Belfast, UK, and Thailand, Chiang Mai, Thailand. So all that experience traveling and living abroad was with type 1 diabetes. I was diagnosed 22 years ago at the age of 7. And I remember at that time being very annoyed that no adults were telling me what was happening. And it was just kind of like I had to figure things out because everyone was skirting around it. So for me, it was kind of like a time of being like, I think I have answers to why I've been feeling crappy since like the age of 6. But I think I was annoyed by that.
I imagine. Tough age too.
Yeah.
Sabella?
Hello, thank you. I'm Sabella. I am in San Diego, California, and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2002. I was 11 years old. And let's see, during that time, so preteen years, I was old enough to understand that there was something of major concern. I was old enough to understand that I was dying, right? Because that's what it is when you are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Your body is shutting down and you're dying. And I was scared. I was very afraid. I was afraid of the future, especially back in 2002. It was before like any social media, really. And so connection with other type 1s was very limited. I actually didn't know another type 1 diabetic for 15 years.
Wow.
So it was very lonely and scary.
Yeah. So Bella, picking up on that point of not knowing another type 1 diabetic, interesting fact. The first other type 1 diabetic that I met is on this call, and that's Greg.
I love
So
it.
Greg was working as an intern for the former company that I worked for, and I noticed his insulin pump, and the rest is history. So yeah, so me and Greg hung out a couple of times while he was here, and you know what? I actually felt for the first time that I could actually level with someone on a T1 level that fully understands, the ins and outs of diabetes. When you speak about like, oh, so I've got a slice of bread, but I actually cut off the crust because it does this to my glucose, and he's like, yeah, that's true. That's how it goes, So, in our outings sometimes I felt like, so I guess I was 3 years into being type 1 diabetic. And I felt like being around some of the other guys that we'd hang out with, or, some of the other colleagues that we with, I felt almost like I was still conscious at that time about my diabetes. And, being a young male of 27, 28 years old, there was a lot of ego involved, like from my side, where I personally saw diabetes as a weakness. And I felt like, maybe I shouldn't test myself around people, because I feel like, these guys are going to have all these questions like, oh, how can you do that here? I didn't know how people felt about seeing blood, drops of blood, or me sticking a needle in myself, while I'm taking insulin. So I guess, like, my first question, for this panel is, like, does diabetes impact your ego in any way? Have you ever thought about that question? And in, thinking about that, how has it actually impacted or affected your quality of care? Were you embarrassed in any way to check your glucose? And all of that. And just, I think more importantly, did you see it as a weakness at the time?
I think if I
don't know. Yeah, great, Jacob.
If I can just jump in. So no, I'm curious to get, first of all, Ron's perspective on this, because Ron mentioned just before we jumped on the call that, you were diagnosed at 31, right? So you were quite a late bloomer in the diabetic sense. And so, by your 30s, you typically know what you're about, you know who you are, like you're pretty well set in yourself and your life and your lifestyle and so on. And then this earth-shattering, life-changing diagnosis comes along and completely rips the rug out from under your feet. And so when you were diagnosed at 31, Ron, how did that look for you? Like, how did you feel? How did you adapt? How did you tell people? Like, what's the story around that?
So it was pretty devastating. Being 30 years old, like you said, I thought I had my life figured out, had a great career. I traveled a lot. I went out with my friends all the time, ate whatever I wanted to eat. And then all of a sudden, I was misdiagnosed. I was diagnosed as type 2. So I ended up sick again because they misdiagnosed me. And my blood sugar was 883 when I was in the ER. So my emotions were all over the place. And I didn't know how to tell people because they noticed I lost 30 pounds. I lost over 30 pounds in less than 30 days. And my friends were like, oh, you're looking great. I'm all like, oh, don't feel great. Trust me. It's very emotional. So I'd break down in front of a couple of the closer friends and they didn't know how to handle it. But, when you're going through your life on cruise control, then all of a sudden it just stops. And you have to, learn how to take your blood sugar every day. The first thing that changed for me was, first thing I would think of in the morning when I woke up is my blood sugar. The last thing I would think of before I went to bed was my blood sugar. Am I going to wake up in the morning? So first I had to deal with that. Then I had to find a friend to actually talk to about this with. Luckily, my boss at the time was type 1 diabetic. So I was able to reach out to him. However, he was the person I ignored for 30 days before that when I started getting sick. So I was ignoring him, and when I was diagnosed, he said if I had just talked to him, he probably could have known because he would have smelled my breath. So I did have someone that I could talk to, and he helped me out through it a little bit, but not with my friendships, not with my life and everything. Like we mentioned, going out to restaurants, I would be like, excuse myself to go to the bathroom every single time after I'd order. My friends like, what are you doing? And then afterwards, we'd be going out, and I stopped drinking because when I first was diagnosed, I came home one night, instead of giving myself long-lasting insulin at that time, I gave myself short. I had the needle in me, and I realized it was the wrong one. So luckily, I stopped. But that, it changes your life emotionally. I was like, okay, I can't go out to the clubs anymore. I can't go out to the bars with my friends, or the pub, so I kind of had to readjust my lifestyle. So I mean, and honestly, there was a point where I was like, do I even want to take my insulin? Do I want to let nature take its course? If we're talking about mental health, that's the reality that I went through.
Yeah.
So I would take some time off from work and reassess myself, where I wanted to be, how I wanted to handle this, and actually seek out guidance from family, from friends, and am I worthy? That's what first came to me. Am I worthy? Am I enough? So I know that's pretty strong. So, but that's
what we're here. Yep. That's what we're here for. That's exactly it. That's exactly what we're here to share about, and we're so grateful that you feel able to do so. Like this is absolutely like the safe space for it, meant to be the open discussion, and by doing so, is exactly the purpose of this webinar in its entirety. There's no point kind of coming on just to talk about the weather. We're here to, and we really appreciate you, all of you, in fact, of course, doing so and being prepared to share these things, because it's the topic of conversation after all, and it is an unfortunate reality for I would suggest that all of us, anyone living with type 1 diabetes at some point, has got to that stage, whether it's immediately after diagnosis and they're presented with the stark reality of the rest of their lives with needles and bloods and all the rest of it, or whether it's 5 years after diagnosis, 10 years after diagnosis, when you think you've got it all, mapped out, you think you finally got your thing under control, and then one unexpected high can leave you thinking, fuck it, like I'm done, I'm out, I'm finished, I will never take another shot. I would rather physically rot than go through this all over again, because whatever I do, and I think it plays into the whole thing. There's no cure for this. Like, yeah, we can manage it, we can control it. There are strategies and guidelines and things we can follow, diets we can adopt to manage and make ourselves, healthy. But it's only ever to regulate. It's never to cure. And that kind of it can feel pointless almost. Because we can't. We're not making ourselves any better. We're necessarily keeping ourselves on track, and I think it's a really important part of the mental health approach, which gets overlooked. It's exhausting.
It is super exhausting, and I mean, it's funny though, like when I was traveling to Washington Dulles airport, and upon landing, it's like I just became worse and worse. But it's the scary part is I was scared at first on the plane, but now that I'm in this full DKA phase, now that my speech is slurring, it's almost like it's like a weird feeling that I had within me where I actually calmed down, and I thought to myself, like, is this it? Am I gonna go? Like, because I didn't know what was wrong with me. I was just feeling absolutely crazy. And I mean, if you read about my diagnosis story, you'll see that the customs agent didn't want to let me in the country because my face had changed because I'd lost so much weight. But I mean, yeah, exactly. But I think like, Dallas or Sabella, I mean, is there anything that you want to add to that point of, how did it impact your life? How has it affected your quality of care? How does it affect your ego?
Yeah, I mean,
too,
1,000%. Everyone has like ego, that whole self-esteem. How do we want to present ourselves to the world, right? For me, as a Black woman, Black Indigenous woman with a disability, like that's a whole lot to be carrying around with you, especially here in America, and globally. You know, I was diagnosed when I was 7, so there wasn't a lot of advocacy for myself. Like, you know, now as an adult, as a 30-year-old, like I'm able to communicate clearly and kind of have those tougher conversations. When I was younger, I remember this moment, and it always kind of comes up when we talk about ego and hiding to manage your diabetes. Is, you know, my parents, they had never had a kid with a disability before. They didn't really know about diabetes before I was diagnosed. And then, you know, these cards were dealt to us. And I remember my dad once, like we were out at a restaurant, and I was just willy-nilly, you know, just like pricking, like insulin, like drawing up the syringes, whatever. And because that's just what I was used to doing at home. And my dad is quite like, I don't know, like a little bit like he gets embarrassed easily. He's like a little bit more shy, that kind of like personality. So I remember him being like, Dallas, do you think you want to like maybe go to the bathroom and do that if we're in public? And my mom immediately interjected and was like, absolutely not. Like you do this out in public. This is a part of your lifestyle. If you start hiding this, then like that's going to be a part of your management. And she's like, you have nothing to be ashamed of. Like you did nothing to deserve this, like blah, blah, blah. And so just kind of having those two different perspectives, like, you know, like the angels on your shoulders, like right in front of me, having this debate always stuck with me. And I kind of take my mom's approach to it. And because of that, it's helped out a lot. I remember going on a field trip in school, maybe like 5th grade, 6th grade or something like that. And I always would have my insulin pump out and like tubes like hanging. I wanted people to see this, like about me. And we had gone on this like trek kind of like field trip, and my pump like snapped from the cord, and I didn't realize, but one of my classmates picked it up out of the woods and was like, this is yours, right? And I was just like, oh my God. And when I realized that it had come off of me, I was like, thank God he knew that that was a part of me, and that it was important that I had that. So
that's awesome, actually. Yeah, because I kept it from a lot of people when I was first diagnosed. I just want to quickly, I'm curious to hear about Sabella's perspective too, because you touched on a couple of things in your introduction which are really interesting. But Rian, I'm curious about your story a little bit, because you were misdiagnosed at first. Well, much like Ron, but Rian, you were misdiagnosed at first with type 2. And then only a few years later, I think you said it was changed to type 1.
No, it's actually still currently that I'm in a confusion state. Officially, I'm a type 2.
Okay,
but
you're taking insulin. Okay.
Yeah, but you know, since diagnosis at 2001 at 27, I've went very quickly into a phase of, you know, insulin dependent, you know, type 2 and stuff.
And so, you were quite late in life. You're 27, almost 31, and so where you were, like you're a young man in your late 20s, world at his feet kind of thing. How did you kind of adapt and approach? I don't want to, dare I say, embrace, but we know diabetes is a very difficult thing to embrace. How did you kind of start coming to terms with your new life as, you know, with diabetes? Rian, or
like, was it difficult at first?
It's like I touched on it, you know. I think I only really came to the acceptance of it, you know, when it started, you know, like you mentioned and stuff, you know, caused a chain, like I can explain, of health issues for me. And one of those, you know, were mental health with a heart attack episode, you know, and stuff, and another heart attack episode and mental health in between, you know, and that made me come to terms and say, I need to take my diabetes management with mental health issues and stuff more seriously, or else I'm going to slowly kill myself, or not slowly, maybe quicker.
That's a scary thing. And, you know, just touching on the ego thing, I mean, just one comment, you know, something that Dallas mentioned was like the person who picked up your insulin pump knew that it was a part of you, right? Just that sentence alone means that it's your identity, it's who you are, right? And I feel like with certain friends, close friends and family, like I could be very open about my diabetes. But now, fast forward 3 years, into the future after diagnosis, at a work function, I was kind of like shy to check my glucose. I was drinking red wine, I was eating fries, and I was just taking insulin without checking. And by the time I left, my glucose had dropped to 0.6 millimoles per liter. Now, in milligrams per deciliter, that is 11. I had 11 milligrams per deciliter, and I didn't feel a thing. I thought I was getting drunk. But that is just how my quality of care was compromised. Luckily, I never passed out. I just grabbed a random cheesecake and a Coke on the table that belonged to a colleague without asking permission. But I mean, you go into this realization after an event or after a series of events happened, like with Rian, that you actually have to start accepting it, and that you realize, like, look, you can't let ego or like being shy about this disease control your life.
Well, I think
You know
so.
what I mean?
Sorry to keep skipping over Stella and Greg. I will get back to you guys because I definitely want to hear your perspective. But the story that you just mentioned, the one about your insanely world record breakingly low, like I've never.
Low.
But when you first told me that story, you said, because you were it was a work conference or something, right? And you said that
it was function. Yeah.
lay down, you go back to your room and you lay down in the corridor outside your room, right? Or you sat down in the corridor outside your room because you knew.
That was a different event.
Oh, right. Okay.
That was in Seattle. It's like all weird stuff happens in the States, guys.
Yes, so you're saying that this other event when you experienced a serious low, like you went and went to your room and you sat outside because you were by yourself on that trip, and you knew that if you went into your room and you passed out in your sleep, you knew that you were not going to wake up.
No one's going to find you.
And that kind of survival instinct is something which so many people without diabetes just would never consider. Like there are other conditions which can put you at risk of unconsciousness and whatever else, but like in the grand scheme of things, that is such like a rare instinct to have to think about, like, and that kind of burden that is placed upon you having to make those decisions, even after a few drinks, whatever. Like I think it people underestimate just how exhausting and how overbearing like that level of thinking, that level of survival is, which I think is really interesting. Sabella, tell us a little bit about when you were diagnosed. You said you were old enough to realize the insane risk that we're faced with and presented with, and it sounds as if, much like it was for me, like there was a lot of like fear mongering, I like to call it, a lot of scare tactics. Everyone talks about the consequences of diabetes. No one talks about the potential for a happy and healthy life if you manage it correctly. Everyone just warns you that you're going to get your legs chopped off and your organs will fail and your eyes will fall out. So I went through that too.
Absolutely.
You.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed when I was 11 years old, and it was back in 2002. And I remember being terrified. I didn't know anything about diabetes, and neither did my family. What I had known about diabetes was this one movie that I had watched, and it was a scary movie. I hated scary movies too. I don't know what, I had no business watching this movie. And I think it was called The Lake House. And anyhow, in there, the character, the woman she was actually doing some other drugs, and the character, a young character, had come in, found her passed out, and in the morning was going to tell her uncle, and her uncle was covering up the drug use and said, oh, she's diabetic. And so this was the first scene that I thought of as an 11-year-old child being diagnosed with diabetes. I immediately made the connection between diabetes and needles, and I was terrified. And so I had asked my mom, like, am I going to have to do shots for the rest of my life? Like, how many? And Yeah, I mean, I remember the experience. It was sort of an in between of Dallas, yours, how you had said that you remember being angry that nobody was really telling you what was going on. And it was similar. Um, yes and no. It was like I was at the doctor's office, and this was the second time that I was at the doctor's office. Actually, they had let us go the first time, and my mom brought me back and was like, there is something not right with my daughter, and you need to figure this out today, now. And so it was actually the nurse that found ketones in my urine. And so the doctor sent me out of the room and to wait in the hall while she told my mom. And I'm 11. I remember knowing that something was terribly, like, I hate the word wrong, but something was of concern, like really major concern. And of course my mom, she was mortified. She was scared. She had no idea what diabetes was and what that meant. And so, and there's not a lot of support either out there, or especially at that time, for caregivers. And so at that time, she was afraid. I was afraid. We had no idea. We're driving to the hospital. And I think that, to come back to that original question of how this impacted my ego, I've been living with type 1 diabetes for 20 years. And so, in different ways, it's impacted my ego in different ways because my ego has developed, right? So I've gone through stages of hiding diabetes. I also moved every single year of my life. Like, I moved 13 times before I was 11. So I was always the new kid in school. And I was the new kid when I was diagnosed with diabetes. I was diagnosed with diabetes in February of 2002, and then I moved to Dallas, Texas in August of 2002. So 6 months later, new kid, new environment, and type 1 diabetes. And I don't think I necessarily, I might have, yes and no. Actually, no, I was talking to a friend recently from middle school, and she said that I was teaching all of the time, and that I was like, I could check your blood sugar. And that's just sort of how I am. I love the human body, and I take care of kids with type 1 diabetes now. And so I've loved to share information, but I think that, like, I can remember many phases, many instances in my life where I did get up and go to the bathroom before. I remember working as a young adult in my early 20s at a corporation where I was told that I had to go to the bathroom in order to do my insulin. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's just been different experiences in life. And I think that environment environment heavily impacts how diabetes can affect your ego.
Yeah.
Right?
I think, as you say, yours has developed, and I think what's maybe nice is that yours has developed in line with sharing and educating people as well, and that's perhaps given you a more positive spin on approaching it. Greg, I'm interested to hear your perspective, actually. I think we touched on it briefly in the episode that you did with us at the very beginning, the exercise one, where we talked about, for those who don't know, Greg is an insane athlete. He runs marathons for fun, which I think is criminally insane.
Fair.
We are talking about mental health after all, so I shouldn't say insane, but I think anyone running marathons is pretty crazy. But so, Greg, with that in mind, like with the athlete's ego, if you like, in mind, like, you know, how has your perspective kind of changed and evolved and adapted with with the diagnosis?
Yeah, so I mean, we've all touched on this so well. I think we're all sort of getting to this point of who are we around and what's their perspective, whether it's work colleagues, TSA, or all
TSA.
family, friends, so on and so forth. And Mr. Bell, to your point, I mean, I was diagnosed around a similar age, 8, 9, 10 years old, and so seeing that change over time, has certainly been it, and especially sort of going into new environments, whether it's new school, or work, right? I've been very lucky in that the running has coincided with working in healthcare, right? So I've sort of been able to, lean one on the other and, and getting to know folks. Say, look, type 1 diabetes, I run long things. That's made me think about, work in whatever way. So, but that's also the process of sort of 20 years of, going through it, and figuring out how to sort of shape it and mold it.
So Greg, so I think this kind of like feeds into question 2 as well that I have for all of you guys is like, and I think we'll just kick off with Greg because you've got like a unique experience I'll share with the panel in a second. But like, like how has like diabetes impacted your mental health, like in a sense where you're an athlete, right? So just to inform the others and to give some context, Greg had a like super bad low in the middle of the night to a point where he seized, right? He had a seizure and he was flung out of his bed and he cracked a vertebrae in his spine, right? Which almost paralyzed him. But this resulted in him being in a body brace for like, was it a month, Greg? Something like that. So how did that sort of impact, like, on your mental health, on your ego?
So, just being recorded, it is. So, I always, so before that happened, I always joked with people. I'd say, look, running, or rather, type 1, like we're all talking about, gives you more rules and more process, right? So the sort of real interesting point of reference is that there are for me, no long-lasting effects on my back, which I'm very fortunate for. But I mention that because, it's given new sort of context to that rules and process thing, and it's given new sort of direction and approach as well. It's, what do you do with your time? I'm coming from a place where a lot of people around me were doing much, much longer events. So having that in mind and thinking about how do you go beyond a marathon, Rihanna, to your point about comrades, how do you go beyond a marathon and then taking a step back from that?
Tricky.
It's like, running was like your escape for this T1 and now you cannot do this. So now you're stuck with like being, I wouldn't say disabled, but maybe temporarily disabled. So now you can't do your running and now you're still stuck with this diabetes. Because it doesn't matter what you can get flu, you can get whatever. Diabetes is that constant in your life, right? And it's in the constant in all of our lives as well. And I just want to sort of just get back to Ron as well. Just in a sense where, the strain, the mental health strain of diabetes, do you feel like it's limited your life in any way? You briefly mentioned that you went from living freely, being diagnosed at the age of 30, to a point where, like, quote unquote, you cannot do certain things anymore, right? So obviously you now know today that you can do anything. But obviously there was a brief period in your life where you felt super limited. And what was like the most daunting thing for you that you felt limited, on or about?
Yeah, it was definitely limited. Right when I was diagnosed, I had started working out and being athletic and actually hiking here in Arizona. And there is a Camelback Mountain, which is a pretty tough hike. A bunch of my friends were going on it. I started up it and I was like, I can't do this. I literally cannot do this. I'm going to be taken off this mountain on a helicopter if I keep going up. It's like my blood sugar is going to drop, because once you start exercising, your blood sugar, for me, it just starts dropping. So it was very limiting in that aspect. And that deflated me because I had to sit there at the halfway point and wait for my friends. And people were walking by looking at me like, oh, are you okay? Are you going to be fine? And I was all like, yes, I'm fine. And I kind of got frustrated. But on the flip side, people were worried, they were concerned. So I had to like flip my mentality around and actually think about it as they're concerned. You know, they are wanting to be helpful. And then I just found things that I felt comfortable doing. And I still haven't gotten to the top of that mountain, and it has been 10 years later since I tried it. But it is my goal. You know, I do a hike a lot more now. I do walk and I jog, and I'm getting there. Like you said, I can do anything I want. I just want to prepare better for it.
Yeah.
And that's the
You
thing.
would.
I didn't know how to plan for it. I didn't know how to make sure I was hiking with. I don't care who you are. I tell everybody I'm type 1 diabetic.
Yeah.
Because I want them to know for a short period, I had to go to Las Vegas twice a month for work. And, you know, when you get low, I start to become belligerent and people think I'm drunk. So I had drinking when I was going to Las Vegas because I didn't want someone to think I was a drunk. You know, I had my medical bracelet on. So I just found ways around or found ways to accommodate myself so I could do what I wanted to do and started living authentically. I wear my insulin pump on my shoulder now and I wear tank tops. And if people ask, more power to them. I will tell them, I'll educate them. Like Sabella, I love how you educate the youth now. I've had a lot of people ask me, like, "Oh, is that?" They think it's a workout device monitoring my heart rate or something.
Oh,
Which I think, you know, at least they're asking, but it's noticeable.
I've had a couple of people asking you recently about my freestyle on my arm, like one guy in the gym and a couple of other guys. I was in Ibiza, and two like Dutch guys came up to me and were like, "Hey man, what's this cool thing?" And we're like, like kind of touching it. Like, oh, that's my booty, but and it felt like it felt kind of empowering actually, because I've only had a freestyle for like I've only had a CGM for like 6 months less. Before then, it was just finger pricks and everything, and I found it was pretty empowering almost to just stand and have like a 2-3 minute discussion with these guys and just tell them what it was and why I needed it. Show them the scanner. They're like, "Oh, that's really cool." And I was like, "Actually, it is pretty cool." You know, I mean, it's not ideal that I have to have one, but as long as I do have to have one, like hell, might as well, you know, flaunt it.
No, I agree.
Coming back to Rian, I want to come back to you really quickly because you mentioned just now, like you know, in your coming to terms with your diagnosis, or even kind of misdiagnosis, whatever the case may be. You said that you were you realized very quickly you had to approach your mental health as part of your overall management and self-care. What kind of steps did that involve? Like, how did you start to address that? Was it with therapy? Was it with finding like a more personal support network? What was it you did to sort of start, you know, being more upfront and being more open about the mental health management side of things?
I think it took me in a phase of, you know, serious depression and stuff, and, you know, the attempt at where you just felt, you know, you're not like typical diabetes burnout, you know, you're not doing, and your ego is telling you other thing, you know, with your management and stuff, where I actually, you know, went in a phase of overdosing myself with my insulin to say, okay, let's just end it all. And after that episode, I had to seriously, you know, get professional help with a psychiatrist, and, you know, that took me back to the wagon and stuff of, you know, getting my mental state level.
Well, good. Well, we're very glad you're still here, and good on you for getting the help that you need, because that in itself would be a major obstacle to a lot of people. Like there is still such a huge stigma about therapy, about psychiatric help, but mental illness,
especially for men.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially for men,
for men, certainly. Which brings us on neatly to a question I want to ask Dallas, actually, because you used to date a guy with type 1 diabetes, right? When you were in Belfast, I believe.
Yeah. So when I was in Belfast, like, so he and I met at diabetes camp, which is also something that I wanted to talk on. Like, I went to camp as a kid when I was 8, so a year after I was diagnosed, and that was my first experience, like, knowing that there was other like people like me who roam the world, you know, and it was very normalized. And when I grew up, I ended up working at that camp. He did Camp America, so he flew out from the UK, and it was all these international staff that came to teach that summer, which was really awesome. And that's how we started connecting. But when I moved out to Belfast for my studies and we started dating, like, or we were living together while we were dating out there, that's when you really get to see the day to day, right? It's no longer just kind of dating, you're living together, you're seeing how each other are managing, and not in a comparing kind of way, but just kind of in a, that's interesting, you do things that way and I do things this way. I mean, there was a couple of times where I let him use my pump as well, because I saw that he wasn't taking care of himself. And what do I mean by that? Like, not testing as much as he could. He was a big drinker, so kind of not really managing his diabetes while drinking. And I don't tell people that you can't drink or you shouldn't drink. I just say you really have to listen to your body and you have to be on top of it. So he wasn't really doing any of that stuff. And I think our time spent together was helpful for the both of us, because we were able to talk a little bit more in depth and kind of like more about this mental health stuff. I'm definitely a talker. I want to talk about feelings, emotions, how do we process, how do we heal, how do we grow? And so through that, it was kind of interesting, because I gained a lot from dating a guy with type 1 diabetes. Like, he was able to read my body. It's like really interesting. Ron was saying that like your boss could have smelled your breath, kind of thing. Like, we had that dynamic, just even pheromones, like being able to understand, like, you need a snack right now, or like, hey, let's test, you want some, maybe you might be a little high, like, you know, because of your behaviors or this or that. No one had ever been able to do that with me before. I think my parents knew how to kind of read into my diabetes a little bit, but they never went that like personal with it. And when you're dating someone, like, you're already sharing bodies and things like that, so it was a lot easier and comfortable for me to kind of have those conversations with him.
That's great. And do you feel like you saw, I mean, it sounds like it was certainly, but did you feel like you saw a lot of progress within him? Like, was there like a willingness to learn, but no one had ever shown him how? Or was there like maybe a typical male stubborn ego getting in the way of progress? How was your experience like with that growth, with that journey?
That's a great question. So he had ended up coming to America for that Camp America program because he was at a point of diabetes burnout. So he wasn't like newly diagnosed. He had maybe had it for maybe 3 years at that point, when he came to work that summer at the camp, and he was just at burnout. And I had never experienced at that point diabetes burnout, nor spoken to someone who was going through that. So for me, I think at first it was me having a little, to be honest, having a little bit of judgment. Like, you know, why is this person not taking care of themselves? Like, what is going on? Like, you know, like, doesn't he know that's hurting his body? But then when we started talking and I really understood, it was just kind of, that's when like the whole mental health thing started to play in, and I was able to learn more about that. And then later in life, I've definitely experienced diabetes burnout. So to answer your question, I'm also plant-based. So whenever we were living together, I was making all these vegan meals. His numbers increased, and he was in range more often. Like when he was changed his diet up, his insulin sensitivity changed. So he was taking less insulin. So that was pretty dope. And like, yeah, we both kind of got more into like fitness together, working out and stuff like that, which was also really cool. So I would say it was a positive impact, I think, for the both of us at the time. And I have no clue how he's doing now. I can't speak on it. I don't know. But at the time, it was cool to see that change for the both of us, that evolution of how we talked about it. Meeting at a diabetes camp meant that we were in a space where we could be ourselves a little bit easier as well. And then juxtaposing that to when we were living in Belfast and like kind of out in the real world, and how, you know, we managed all that, just kind of keeping each other accountable, I think was really helpful.
It's awesome. And it's great to see that kind of growth. But what you've touched on something. Well, there's two questions I want Sabella to start with this one, because I mean, diabetes burnout is very much a topic around mental health and whatnot. But I get to pick up on something you just said about, you know, you noticed why this guy isn't taking care of himself, and you know, and you're there thinking, knowing the damage that he's doing and wondering why he's not, you know, responding to it appropriately. That is, I find, is a real factor within diabetes burnout, in that, and we've touched on it briefly before on this very call, but you always kind of want to do that damage sometimes. Like you want to give up, like you don't care, like you kind of just want your sugar. I don't know how graphic you want to get with it, but like you want your sugars to ravage you, you know, like you think, fuck it, fuck all of it. and I'm going to run as high as I can. I'm not going to inject again. I'm just going to just let me rot in peace, or it wouldn't be at all peaceful, but that's so you sometimes very deliberately don't take care of it, because you for however long you are just so desperate to feel quote normal unquote, by not having to test your blood or not injecting, and even if it makes you feel absolutely awful, you're still trying to claw back some sense of control in your life. Now, ironically, the control would come from testing and injecting, because that's what you have to do to control. But you want to take back your own sense of control by not giving in and not having to submit to this disease. Because no matter how free and fulfilling and wholesome and healthy our lives with diabetes can be, we're still on our knees to this condition a whole lot of the time. There is no matter how well, no matter how often you stay in range, or no matter how many marathons you run, let's say, or no matter how many countries you visit, or whatever it might be, of course we can still live fulfilling and amazing and wonderful lives, but there is always that diabetic devil on your shoulder. There is always that voice in your head, whether it's last thing at night before you check your sugars, or first thing in the morning you wonder what they are. We are still bound by this disease in so many respects. And so part of diabetes burnout is very deliberately sometimes not taking care of yourself, knowing full well it's doing damage to you. There's apathy, and then there's aggressive, self-willing hurt, if you will, which it runs a pretty horrifying spectrum, I found, at least in my experience. So Bella, so on the diabetes burnout note, I'm curious, I'm sure you've experienced it at some point in your life. How did that when did you first realize, for example, what was your first episode, or what was your first manifestation of diabetic burnout? How did you feel?
It's so interesting because I feel like diabetes burnout, when I started to become familiar with that term, it seems like it's such a easy to recognize certain period of time in your life. And when I look at my life, and in the 20 years that I've been living with diabetes, I was like, there were times where I could relate to what diabetes burnout looked like. And then at the same time, I was like, but I don't relate to the whole picture of diabetes burnout. And so I think it's very interesting because the mental and emotional toll of living with type 1 diabetes is also a forever thing, right? It's not it's not like this is just a one-time thing. And so diabetes burnout, I think that there can be a very intense phase of diabetes burnout, right? But I also think that you can experience diabetes burnout a little bit over time. It's chronic. We live with a chronic condition. And so some of the aspects of diabetes burnout, Jacob, like you were talking about, you almost want to take back that sense of control. And for me, as you were saying that, was thinking about where is that coming from? And it was this feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. And for sure, many times in my life, I felt like that. At the same time, I pushed and resisted and was pushing against diabetes because I had originally seen diabetes for the longest time as something that was going to limit me or prevent me from doing things. And so I was, instead of working with it, I was working against it. And that was creating more resistance, right? And so yeah, I think that diabetes burnout can manifest in different ways. And just like type 1 diabetes is chronic, we are injecting ourselves with insulin. Sometimes it might be MDI, sometimes it might be pump, and that can change throughout your life. Same thing, the mental and emotional status of that can can fluctuate and show up differently. And I think that also another thing too, like ego wise, I feel like that's such a male term, right? But we all have it. It's not just a masculine or feminine thing. Ego is just a part of being human, and I think that there is this sort of stereotype that men don't show up to their emotions fully. And you can have some women that also are like that too. And you can also be a person that is ego, and we all are, right? And have like that masculine and feminine energy. And sometimes they're showing up one more powerful than the other. And so I think it is very interesting, like throughout this conversation, just hearing the different the different experiences, but the similarities between all of us, and we can all relate to many of the experiences throughout our journeys with type 1 diabetes, especially mentally and emotionally. I too, like Rianne, have gone through, I still see a therapist. I look at it as like the 3 S's, and it's self, social, and services. And that's how I take care of my mental health. And that's how I take care of my overall health, is what can I do for myself, the support. And so support would be like second layer. So for me, it's the diabetes community, all of you, right? And being able to connect and talk about these things, and then services. And that sometimes is therapy. And the cost of diabetes for me has been the biggest challenge. And mentally and emotionally.
Honestly, don't envy. I mean, for you guys in America, I've got to say, it's probably not my place to say because I have no first-hand experience of the healthcare system out there. But for you guys, you are fighting one hell of a battle against the healthcare system alone. That would add, or must add, so many of.
I actually went through that this week. I just lost health insurance, and thank goodness for the Affordable Care Act, because my insulin was going to be $2,995, which I didn't have. All that just for insulin. So that, to the mental health issue, that really adds a strain to it. How are you going to get the medication you need just to live? And it should be cheap. It should be. But yeah, so sorry to interrupt, but I agree with you.
I feel like sometimes, like to some of you guys in the States, like I wish I could send some insulin there, like insulin that I just, get for like next to nothing or for free. But then you never know if the insulin's actually like packaged properly, if it will be compromised by the time it gets there. Because a lot of Americans actually get the insulin from Canada.
Or Mexico.
I've just got a high alarm on my Libre. I'm just gonna proceed to the shot right now. You guys can
treat up, Buttercup.
While you guys were chatting, you didn't even see us knock in the shot. So I feel like there's so many. I feel like this hour just flies by, and we just practically scratch the surface of a topic that we could actually just run with and chat about for hours. And I just wanted to say something in terms of that burnout. At times when you hit with high stress in your job, high stress in your studies, like I just finished a master's degree now. So that was stressful. My work has been stressful. I haven't been working out as much as I could. So there's just moments where it just hits me like, listen, I'm not going to eat a wholesome meal tonight. Tonight I'm eating Burger King and I'm taking fries too. Because usually when I have Burger King, I'll take like a double patty. And so that is more filling so that I can minimize on the carbs. But then I'll do the double patty and I'll do the fries. And then you just feel like for myself, I feel like I'm in this self-destructive mode. And I mean, I too have been sort of dealing with this type of mental health strain and getting counseling as well. I actually approached the counselor from an anger perspective, not from my diabetes, because I said, like, look, it's the mismanagement or the way that I'm managing my diabetes that is causing a lot of anger and frustration in me, that's causing it to spill over into other sort of, is it facets or just areas of my life, where like the diabetes burnout can actually cause me like to snap at my wife or to like, just like perform poorly at work because I just simply don't care about work or how I perform in work, or like I'm giving in like this half-ass assignment that I didn't even care about. But listen, Jacob, you've been doing so much hosting. What about you sharing? What's been going on, man? What type of strain you've been? How do you overcome mental health strain? And like what's the area of your life that was affected mostly? And I think you could just link into like the final question of the evening as to like how would you advise others? How do you overcome mental strain? What are the steps that work for you? And I think all of us could then get a turn just to advise.
Yeah, I would love to. I would love to hear what advice the rest of us have. That's a good question, actually. I was having this conversation with someone else who interviewed me for a webinar called Invisible Wave Illness. So they run an amazing page on Instagram which deals with invisible illnesses and conditions like diabetes, like Crohn's, like IBF and IBD, and so on and so forth. So and they asked me kind of a similar question, like how you approached it mentally and whatnot, and sorry, they asked me when I started my page, when I started Kinetic Diabetic, and I realized in giving them that answer that actually starting that page was a big way for me to overcome my mental block, if you like, with this disease. Because up until I started the account 2 years ago, I'd been diabetic for 8 years. And for the first 3 years, I kept it under wraps. I felt embarrassed. I think primarily I felt embarrassed. I felt ashamed a little bit, and I was just so frustrated and so helpless. And I got wrapped up in like this uncertain future. I really focused on the negatives, the potential damaging complications, consequences, all of that. And I felt broken. I just felt like, major organ failure. You can't cure it. All you can do is control it. And I have still a huge issue with needles. I'm a lot better, obviously, these days. Several tattoos and 10,000 insulin shots later, I'm a little bit better with my needles. But at the time, shit, like it was when I was first diagnosed and they said this is your reality now. I couldn't accept it. I was in just a very, very dark place, I think. And for me, like I'd say the main mental health thing, I suppose, it depends what kind of lens I'm looking at it through. It's just that I still feel very self-conscious about being somewhat different. I mean, we're all different, right? But whether it's like crappy jokes that you see on TV, the ones which go on about sugar causing diabetes and all of that, or even if I'm in a bad mood, for example, and I go to the gym hoping to get out of that bad mood, because maybe I'm in a bad mood because of something else, bad day at work, whatever it is, and I'll go to the gym and I'll see the sign on the steam door, on the saw door, which anyone with a pre-existing heart condition or diabetes should stay away. Wow, yourself, like don't stop putting me in this bucket. Stop putting me in this. Don't pigeonhole me or whatever. Like, of course, like it would be irresponsible for them to not put a health warning on there. But I feel like I felt so super self-conscious about being part of that, demographic, I guess, and feeling weak and knowing that even though I know in my heart that I'm not, I know I'm capable. I know I'm able. I know I'm not strict. I don't consider myself disabled. I just consider myself slightly what's the word I'm looking for? Disadvantaged, not even disadvantaged, just inconvenienced, I suppose.
Inconvenience, a good one.
Inconvenienced.
Not even challenge, just inconvenienced.
Yeah, I think. But to answer your question, I think the main mental health thing I got was just the frustration, and also actually for me another one would be misunderstanding, which brings us on nicely to a comment that Ivory has left on Facebook. But I think for me, I'm always self-conscious, even to this day, when trying to explain to someone who's got no idea about my condition, like that for whatever reason, be it a high or a low blood sugar or whatever, it's incapacitated me in some way. Like telling my boss, even as understanding as they are, telling my boss that I slept in or overslept or missed a half day of work because I was in bed paralyzed from a hypo hangover because I went low during the night and overtreated it, and I feel like toxic right now and I can't come to work. And they're like, what? Your blood sugar was high? The fuck does that mean? You know, like no one's ever actually challenged me on that. Even me in my head, it doesn't sound legit. You know, it doesn't sound real. What do you mean? I get it here. You know, like stop fucking around. So and no matter, I mean, I've been very lucky, kind of like Greg actually. I've been very lucky that I've had an amazing support network. You know, so many people have asked all the right questions and shown interest in all the right ways and gone out of their way to sort of understand how they can help and all the rest of it. I couldn't really have asked for more. But all the same, you know, trying to explain what a low sugar really feels like, or trying to tell people that, you know, that you just don't feel right in yourself because you've been running high all day and you're just exhausted. To me, which goes back to the thing about the invisible illness, the conversation I was having with the other page. Like that's the main burden for me is being, as Sabella pointed out, as being lonely, isolated. No matter how supportive or positive or engaged your friends, your family, your partners are, which is always, of course, very, very valuable and appreciated. No matter what they do, they don't know what you're going through. Because, like, yeah, someone I was speaking to put it so neatly, like when you're high, when you feel so toxic, you know, when you're low, it's like you're in primal survival mode. When you're high, you're a zombie, you know, you feel revolting, and like there's just no way you can explain to someone, hey, I can't come out tonight because I've been high blood sugars all day. And it's like, what? You know. So I think that my advice. So in fact, what I want to touch on before we get to the advice round actually is a great comment from Ivory on Facebook. Maybe a friend. I think she said hi to you at the beginning, Dallas. So maybe Ivory's a friend of yours.
She is.
You know Ivory. So shout out Ivory, who said that she hates being blamed for her diet for the type 1. So many people don't realize that we are not to blame, which is absolutely true. I think I've had these kind of awkward questions before. Like my experience in Malaysia, for example, very quickly, is that in Malaysia, type 2 diabetes is a national health crisis, much like, dare I say, it probably is in the States. And the understanding of type 1 is very, very limited, but everyone associates type 2 because the Malaysian diet especially is like, so all the local food is swimming and it's so good, but it's so bad, you know, like it's swimming in fat and sugar and processed sugars and all the rest of it. And so there is just this natural link between, you know, too much sugar is diabetes. And so whenever I tell everyone that I'm diabetic, they're always like, oh, you must have eaten too much sugar, or, oh, you don't look diabetic, or whatever. So I've certainly felt that as well, Ivory. So I know how you feel. Has anybody else felt that?
Yeah, you get a lot of those comments, like, well, why did you get it? How did that happen? And there is kind of like this accusatory tone, you know? And I remember as a kid kind of being taught by the hospital staff to tell other kids my age that you can't catch it from me. So that was like my intro to people. Oh, I have type 1. You can't catch it from me. You can still hang out with me. And like looking back, I'm like, oh gosh, that's so cringy. But that is kind of what these able-bodied people were thinking would be the best approach for me to bridge this gap of having a disability with able-bodied people. So it's interesting when you have more one-on-one conversations, especially as you're older, like what comes out in those conversations, you can really see what people know and what their ignorance for, you know, our experience as well.
Yeah, agreed. How about you guys? Rian, like
sorry, go ahead.
No, either one of you jump in.
I was just going to say, yes, Dallas, that's still a thing too, by the way, as a nanny for type 1 diabetic kids. Kids only know so much. People only know so much. And so it happens where they think it's, you know, is it contagious? And they'll ask. And I think it's important too for us, it's, you know, it's a challenge, but to realize, for me, what I think of is remember your knowledge of diabetes before you were diagnosed with diabetes. I knew nothing.
knew
I
nothing.
did not know anything. Yeah, I knew the Woman in the Lake House movie, and that's all I knew. And so that's actually been a really great tool that I use when it comes to educating or just like conversing with people. And Dallas, you mentioned able-bodied, and I love that. I personally, for the longest time, think I hated the term disability and did not embrace that term until one day I looked it up on Google and I was like, what does disability mean? And looking at it right now, it's a person having a physical or mental condition that limits movements, senses, or activities. 1,000% yes. Like type 1 diabetes is a disability. But I think that what I had to go through is this understanding that I am not entirely type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is a part of me, but I am not entirely type 1 diabetes. And although I live with a disability, it doesn't mean that I can't do things. It means that I do them differently. And another aspect too, Jacob, you had said you started your kinetic diabetic page, and that was a way of like overcoming the sort of space that you were in mentally and emotionally with type 1 diabetes, right? And yeah, and I think it's interesting too, like the term overcoming versus manage, because what if those emotions come back? And they do, they come back on a day-to-day basis. There's times when last night I had to change my pump and I was like, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I really don't want to do it. And the emotion is here. It's not like I've overcome this emotion, like it's not going to be present. It's a part of the human experience. And it's a part of the human experience with diabetes. So I tend to use the term manage because
I like that. I can work with that. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I think maybe if I think about it as overcoming, I think maybe just that first major obstacle, because I wasn't open at all. Like before I was gradually being a bit more open with it, but like this was a great leap forward, I guess, in terms of me being open and sharing everything. I never thought it would come this far, and I'm so delighted that it has. But the idea, a couple of years ago, if you told me that I'd be running this account talking about my daily life with diabetes, I'd have laughed in your face and punched you in the mouth. But now, like, I'm really enjoying it, you know? And so part of starting this page was to become more accountable to myself. You know, I had no agenda. I had no agenda as to where it was going. It was just going to be like a side project, like a fun way for me to, because my day job is like creative stuff. I'm a copywriter, I do marketing or whatever. So it was just going to be like a little side. I don't even want to say a side hustle, because I'm not in this for the income, because God knows there isn't any, you know. I wouldn't, you know, I'm not aiming for there to be. So I guess what I was overcoming was that first, you know, it was that first hurdle, and God only knows there's a lot to overcome yet, even and then manage beyond that, you know. But I think I overcame like the one of the major blocks that I had, and that was being open with it. And now off the back of that, I'm much more comfortable to share and to discuss it and so on. So still plenty left to manage and to face up to. Rian's back. Hey, Rian. We lost you there for a bit.
Yeah, I think it's the power situation in the country.
Anyway,
I do like how you mentioned manage it, because it is a constant management process here. Like I could be walking down the aisle of the grocery store and I could walk by the candy section. I'm like, oh, I want those Twizzlers. I want those Snickers or whatever. Like, and I'm not gonna lie, I've done it. And then I regretted it after the fact. And then the next time I'm like, I have to remind myself, no, I did that. I woke up miserable the next morning. My blood sugar was in the 400s or 500s. Like I just wasn't mentally there. So you're right. It is managing it consistently, because it's those one-offs that we can get ourselves in. We're like, I can do it. I can do this. And it's like, you can, but just be prepared for the consequences.
Yeah.
And that was one of the hardest things to overcome. It's like, you know, being diagnosed late in life. I can't have everything. I can have it, but there's consequences. and it's recognize those consequences and owning it. So, and the pump thing, mine expires in the middle of the night. I rip it off. I don't change it until the next morning, and those are the worst days for a couple of hours. So, I love this conversation because this is real life. This is what we really go through.
Yeah,
I think,
and it's that.
Sorry, I just want to put owning something, Ron, as you like, owning is a very, very powerful word and a very, very appropriate one, I think, for what we go through. And I've said a couple of times on my page, like, own it, but it doesn't own you. You know, control your diabetes. Don't let it control your life. You know, because as much as I said earlier, this has us on its feet, right? We still very, you know, day, if you like, as long as we take the appropriate steps. You have to own it. You have to face it. You have to just take accountability. You have to accept, as much as you might want to, God knows I didn't this time, you have to accept now that this is what it is. It doesn't have to be the death sentence that it used to be. You know, it doesn't have to like be, you know, practice. Some people I've seen, this is maybe open for the panel. I'm curious as to how you guys feel about this, because I've seen a lot of people on Instagram, which of course is a very powerful, you know, brought us all together, very powerful community, amazing to be a part of, and so valuable in so many ways. But I see a lot of people talking on there about, you know, positive thinking with diabetes, and a lot of them take the approach and the perspective that they are grateful for it, like, because it's taught me resilience, it's taught me strength, it's done this, it's given me structure, it's opened my life to these connections and so on, which, like, I can't take any of that away from anybody, because it has taught me strength and resilience and opened me to connecting with all you guys, which is wonderful. But if I'm honest, I stop short of being grateful. You know, like I can't, you know, I can look at the positives, of course, and I maintain that weirdly I'm probably healthier with diabetes in a weird way, because I was diagnosed at university and I could have just gone down the route of drinking, which I haven't stopped. I still drink like a champion, but I could have stopped my fitness journey. I could have stopped going to the gym and everything else. But because I was diagnosed when I was, you know, I kept up a regular gym routine, and I'm now more aware of my nutrition and everything more than ever. So I think, ironically, I'm probably healthier now with diabetes in a weird way. But no one is asking for diabetes to teach you how to be interested in your health and fitness, right? Or your nutrition. So I stop short of being, ooh, I like this from Ivory, actually. This is an interesting one. There's a kind of toxic positivity. Yeah, Ivory, I think Ivory gets it spot on, I think, for me at least. But I don't want to take the wind out of anyone's sails here. That approach worked for them. So I'd love to hear from you guys, like, where you sit on that spectrum.
I'm so happy that this was brought up, because it was actually Ivory. We both went to University of Pittsburgh. We had the same math class. She saw my pump cords hanging all out, and she was like, "Do you have diabetes?" I was like, "Yes." And we connected, you know, in friendship in that way. And I remember, because of my experiences with diabetes camp and just kind of like the hurrah, like, you know, diabetes tribe kind of thing, I never had acknowledged or unpacked that element of, yes, these positives came from this, like the people you met, the experiences, blah, 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 blah. This is why you started traveling abroad, because of the people you met in the community, yada, yada, yada. But it wasn't until having this conversation with Ivory where she was like, I am not grateful for this chronic illness, and I will never be, you know? And I remember being like, oh, like, you know, like, oh my God, like we met because of this, you know? And realizing that, if I really unpack this and looked at it, you know, gratitude is not necessarily something that I feel when it comes to my relationship with living with this disease. It's acknowledging that with the heavy comes some positives for sure. But would I rather live a life where I'm not on like fight or flight mode all the time, or trying to be in survival mode when my blood sugar is low? Yes. And I feel like getting to a place where I can admit that, and getting to a place where I can speak unflinchingly about that, is a little bit more realistic for me. Like now, when I was younger, it was a lot of the toxic positivity of like, but you, like, trying to show other people how their life would be worse if they didn't have type 1 diabetes. And it's just like, I don't take that approach anymore. Yeah.
Interesting. I think Earl's having issues with his mic, but hang on, let me bring him back in. I think Earl had a comment here, but I can't unmute you, Earl. Oh, you've muted yourself.
Oh, okay, cool. No, I think my mic is just problematic for everyone else, but not for me. So what I wanted to say about the toxic positivity is that that's exactly why some days I don't want to open Instagram, because
Mm.
there's so many diabetic accounts that I follow. So I only have one account, right? I don't do the separate sort of private life and diabetes life, because my private life is my diabetes life, right? Just like from an identity point of view, right? But sometimes I feel like, if I'm gonna open this damn Instagram, I'm just gonna see diabetes like everywhere. And when you've had lows in the middle of the night, or you've had highs, or you wake up like on 17 or 300 sugar, right? 300 glucose, and you're like, I don't want to hear the shit today. Yeah, you just don't want to die your beat, on a day if you can realize it. Today I cannot die your beat. So I just feel like there's definitely that thing out there. And no shade to anyone, because sometimes I think I think some people need more positivity than others, to keep going. Like for me, I can probably just have a conversation with one other diabetic and then I'm good to go. But for some people, they feel like the need for that constant affirmations. They feel like they need to flood it out there, and then they feel better about diabetes. So I think everyone's need is different, in terms of that, but it can be toxic to others, definitely. But also it can also put you out of touch with reality, because some posts may give the impression, even though it's not intended, that that isn't the sort of really shitty side to diabetes.
I'm curious. I think being out of touch is really, really a good point. I'm curious with like Greg, with your experience, right? I mean, you said you were lucky to have a support system which was always, on your side from the get-go, and it sounds as if it was a naturally positive rather than toxic one. But still, in your experience, did you find people were maybe compensating for you? With people too positive on your behalf? It's ridiculous, but like, were they trying to be cheerleaders? Needed a shoulder, like, you know what I mean? What was your experience with potential toxic positivity?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, what speed do I operate at? And how much can I sort of manage myself or be attuned to versus not? So Earl, to your point, I tend not to be paying a whole lot of attention to the socials, because that's something I can sort of opt into when I want to, if I want to. Right. And so, for me, I think it's sort of become this question of like, what can I, manage and sort of come into myself, what's around me, and how can I sort of balance, good relationships on, the sort of day to day versus what I might or might not need. And all of our points sort of shifted over time. What might have been the case 20 years ago with the diabetes camp, sitting around a campfire singing, the songs.
I'm not sure. I mean, maybe because I'm British and I'm dry and sarcastic. I don't think we do that anyway, with or without diabetes.
Right.
Like, we don't do summer camp.
No. Right.
We do tea parties. We don't do summer camp.
But it's sort of this great perspective on, over time you start to get a sense of what might work, but what might not work for you.
And everyone has like a different level, don't they? But it's an interesting one for sure. So we're coming up to almost like an hour and 20 minutes, which is awesome. And for me, I could sit here for the rest of the night, but I'm not sure if our audience could. And so I'm going to wrap this up with one more question to the entire panel. I want us to go around really quickly and give us, well, this is thanks to Earl, this great question is, but give us, if you could, just what advice you would give to, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's yourself, whether it's advice that you could give to yourself as a newly diagnosed type 1, whether it's some advice you'd give to a newly diagnosed type 1 if it's not yourself, or anybody who's at any stage in their diabetic journey, or whatever the case may be. What advice would you give them if they are going through these mental health struggles, if they're experiencing burnout, or even diabetes distress, which is a new term I found out quite recently, which sounds even worse than burnout? whether they're experiencing that or whatever the case may be. Basically, what would your advice be to someone who's experiencing mental health struggles with diabetes? So we'll go around the top of my screen. I've got Greg, Ron, Earl, Sabella, Dallas, and Rian. Okay, so we'll go in this order, and you guys just give me a quick roundup of the advice that you'd give.
Gotcha. So my sort of one sentence here is keep searching for things that work or for things that don't, because having a sense of one or the other could be helpful.
Yeah, it's just as important to know what doesn't, right? And I think keep searching is brilliant. Be curious, be interested, be engaged, right? I think I like that a lot. Keep searching is nice. Ron, what would you say?
I would say take off the handcuffs of diabetes off of yourself and own your diabetes and put the handcuffs on it. So take that yourself.
Take back control. Love it.
Yep.
Brilliant. Earl?
Me? Okay. Yes, I was just thinking, normalize issues around mental health and diabetes. Because the problem comes in where people don't seek help is because they feel ostracized or they feel like an outcast or a freak show or something to that effect, and I feel like if we're going to normalize it, if we're going to speak openly about, oh yeah, I have a therapist, oh, I have a psychologist, I see a psychiatrist, I have a support group, then, if we're saying that, then that's okay for the next person to do, or they might feel it's okay, even if it impacts one or two people at a time, we'll slowly reach that level where everything is normalized.
That's brilliant. Brilliant. I think that's so important. It's so many layers. Communication is key, in any relationship, or with or without diabetes for that matter. But normalizing it is huge for sure. Sabella, what would you say?
Compassion. In all aspects. Compassion. This illness takes a lot of self-discipline and self-motivation, and it can become incredibly restrictive. Like if you're looking at it like a teeter-totter, it can become incredibly restrictive with too much of that discipline and that energy, right? So that self-compassion and managing it for yourself, and then the compassion where extending outward, whether it's somebody else with type 1 diabetes and how they're living, or someone without type 1 diabetes and their understanding of it. But having that lens of compassion always is, I think, incredibly beneficial when it comes to the mental and emotional health.
For sure. Be kind. It's just trying to learn to be kinder to yourself, right? Which can be
Totally.
tough. It can be tough when you're faced with when you're faced with the concept of your body giving up on you. The bastard beta cells just it's easy to get wrapped up in this. Certainly what I struggled with is just I was annoyed at myself for being broken and for not working anymore, for my body having given up in a way. But yeah, it took me a while to be kinder to myself in that regard. Dallas, what would you say?
Some advice that I am giving myself lately and trying to follow and put into practice is to communicate when I'm low and high, just in the moment, letting people know, whether it was before this chat, I was running a little late and I could have just let my anxiety go through the roof, but I was like, I'm just going to let them know I'm a little low, I'll be there in a second kind of thing. So even bringing that into my therapy sessions, there's times when I'm communicating and then I start to bottom out because of whatever we're talking about. And I'm like, okay, I need to let you know, this is affecting my behavior and blah, 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 blah. So my biggest advice is to communicate in the moment for lows and highs, because I think the people around you, whether you're married, dating, at a job or whatever, it's going to help you, I think, start to normalize communicating about how you're physiologically doing as well and not hide behind that.
Nice. Brilliant. Okay, great. Thank you. And Rian, lastly from you, please, what advice would you give to someone who's maybe going through similar issues to we've discussed?
I would say my advice would be, you are human at the end of the day. Although you've got diabetes, you've got mental issues, be kind to yourself. That's the big thing, is to be kind with yourself. And so, you can access the kindness of other people also.
That's actually such a good point. Of course, if you allow yourself, if you practice, like Sabella said, compassion and self-compassion, then you allow yourself, as you so rightly point out, you open yourself up to receiving that from others too. But you have to do it from the inside out a lot of the time.
Because if you can go back with the topic of the men's mental health and stuff, men tend to always think, always don't cry, if I can use a American term.
Yeah.
And men in general need to acknowledge that they can also cry.
Yeah, for sure. It's and that's a stigma the world over, I guess, and it's a very important one to kind of break through as well. What a lot of people didn't realize, and actually part of the reason we did this in the first place was because November isn't just Diabetes Awareness Month; it's also like Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, right? With the Movember campaign, you guys might have seen, like that's a big movement around the world too, and that is all about getting guys to open up to each other and breaking stigmas and so on. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good piece of advice. I mean, you guys have stolen the good ones. So I don't know, I don't have much left. I don't have much good advice left, I suppose, but to jump on everything, I would repeat it. Of course, everything you guys just said, I think is all very relevant and very powerful, very important. And I guess my advice would be, if you are facing struggles, if you are struggling coming to terms with various aspects of this condition, or on a daily basis, you're faced. Basically, I would say that try your very best, and it can be very, very tough, but try your very best not to get wrapped up in an uncertain future, which hasn't happened yet, because if you take care of the little details on a daily basis, that uncertain future will become much more certain. Like you getting wrapped up in the future will compromise your ability to take action in the present, but the present is where you have control. So whether that's, do what you can at every moment, at every present moment, to do what you need to do to take care of yourself, whether that's testing your blood, whether that's taking your shot, whether that's taking an extra couple of seconds to look at the food packet, to look at the nutrition information on food packaging, whatever you can do, whatever you can control in the present moment will then make the future a much more positive one. Put the small details into play and the big picture will come into focus. And if you do it right, or if you do it as best you can, the big picture will look a lot healthier, a lot more positive than the one that you've got kind of churning around in your head, which, given the potential complications of this disease, it's no wonder that you're imagining a negative one. But what no one tells you, and what I'm trying to tell you now, is that if you take care of yourself on a daily basis, that big picture will look a whole lot rosier. I just want to finish, just give a shout out to Naeem, who I think who's hopefully still with us. He's been watching, I think since the beginning, who just says that he's been inspired by listening to all of our stories here. And it says it took him a long time to figure out, since being diagnosed in 1991. That's a year after I was born. So, more power to you, dude. That he figured out, it took him many years to figure out after that diagnosis that he could do anything he wanted. Diabetes doesn't restrict you as a lot of people understand it to do. It just means you have to plan better. And that's exactly it. Just plan, just day by day, not month by month, I suppose, So, yeah, shout out Naeem. He's still here. Thank you very much. Appreciate your support, my man. And I think, guys, that is about, we're almost at an hour and a half, which has felt like 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah. No, Naeem's still there. Big shout out.
Yeah. It's like I said, we could keep going, I'm sure, for a while longer, but it's a Sunday. People have places to be, dinner to eat, breakfast to have, whatever time it is in the world, wherever you are. So I think this is a good time to wrap it up. So I just want to say to all of you here, to the girls especially, for joining us and giving us a really valuable feminine perspective. To Rian and Ron, our new guests, for coming and being so candid, actually being so very honest and open and forthcoming with your struggles and where you were at a certain point in your life. That's exactly what we were hoping for out of this discussion, and we've certainly accomplished that. So thank you guys very much. To Greg for coming back. Good to know he was keen to get involved after the first talk. And to Earl, of course, always. Earl's been the driving force behind this entire series. So my gratitude to him. And to all of you watching, whether live or whether you're watching this back or wherever you are, however you're watching it, we thank you for tuning in. We thank you for being with us on this little journey of ours. Like, this is the last in this series, but by no means the last time. I'm sure we'll get together. We'll have these discussions. We'll keep this dialogue going because, like Sabella says, this is not something you overcome just like that. This is something you manage, right? And so there will always be something to manage. And so there will always be something for us to discuss. So I think for now, though, guys, we'll let our audience go and get up the rest of their Sunday. But thank you all very, very much. We really appreciate it. And for giving up your time. Of course, if I could afford to pay you, I would, but I can't, so I won't.
You can always pay us in pounds, but in rands, then we get a bit more.
Yeah.
I can get quite good rands of pound these days. So if I get holiday to cheap towns, cheap town. Cape Town's looking pretty cheap. Maybe I should.
Yeah. Yeah, we're waiting out here, man.
I wish
Yeah.
if I could fly in, I would, but man, this new variant. Anyway,
Thank you so much, Erlen, Jacob, for having us. It was a pleasure.
yeah,
Yes,
Just take 30 seconds after we cut.
Right, we'll see you all later. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.